Let me now introduce you to Ribal Al-Assad, who is the founder and director of the Organisation for Democracy and Freedom in Syria and the founder chairman of the Iman Foundation, an organisation I've worked with in the past, which promotes interfaith and intercultural dialogue and has actually organised events in this Parliament focusing on some of these issues. Ribal, over to you.
Thank you very much, Saeed, for inviting me to be here today. It's really always a great pleasure and honour. Ladies and gentlemen, we stand inside this incredible place, which is, of course, an equivocal symbol of democracy and freedom. I'm sure that many of us disagree vehemently on many subjects, but I know that every one of us agrees how lucky we are that those disagreements can be voiced publicly and that ultimately they will be resolved peacefully and democratically. It is not secret that many areas of the world are less fortunate. Too many people live in countries ruled by dictatorship and theocracies, and within many of them, poverty and discontent are rife. This problem is not exclusive to the Muslim majority countries, but the people in those countries have been hit particularly hard. And my work in this area often meets the same objection. Democracy cannot work in Muslim majority countries, but it can and it must, which in a nutshell is why we are here. We must start by making it very clear that there is a difference between Islam, a peaceful understanding religion, and Islamism, a perverted ideology seeking to impose Sharia law through whatever means are required. Islam is compatible with democracy, as it is demonstrated in Tunisia, where despite the turmoil of the past years, their post-revolution constitution is a statement to the values we hold so dear. It is no coincidence that Tunisia's standards of education are relatively high, a theme to which I shall return. Islamism, on the other hand, in the words of Turkey's President Erdogan, views democracy as just the train we board to reach our destination. Many Islamist groups avoid that part of the journey altogether. They include Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, the Turkestan Islamic Party, Abu Sayyaf al-Nusra, and the Islamic State of Syria and Iraq. And at the heart of the Islamist movement around the world sits the Muslim Brotherhood, an extremist group with an extremist agenda, despite the tendency of the Western to label it as moderate. Its flag, for example, includes three elements: the Quran, which references Sharia law; two swords, which reference jihad; the words prepare, referencing to the surah in the Quran that mentions terrifying the enemy of Allah, around which is written, Allah is our objective, the Prophet is our leader, Quran is our law, jihad is our way, dying in the name of Allah is our greatest hope. The Brotherhood's offshoots include Hamas and Al-Qaeda. The tragedy for the MENA region is not just that Islamic influence began to grow as a result of economic poverty in authoritarian regime, but that it's continuing to do so despite that was known as the Arab Spring, which was initially a series of liberal protests by the people against state repression. When the economic crisis hit Greece and the streets descended into chaos, democracy held sway, and in 2012 the government fell peacefully. But under the authoritarian regimes of the MENA countries, economic hardships led to tougher measures. As ever, political parties, political funding and mass gatherings were banned, and the state reaction to popular uprisings was often violent. It is now widely chronicled how liberal causes in the MENA region were hijacked by Islamists who were able to move fast within a power vacuum to fund, encourage and set loose militants on the ground. This hijack was systematic and ruthless. It was driven by vested interest within an ever-growing sectarian divide across much of the region. A Shia axis linking Syria, Lebanon, Iraq and Iran stands against a Sunni axis linking Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar and Turkey. The two sides have reacted to the Arab Springs in different ways, but an objective understanding of their roles becomes increasingly difficult as the vast majority of the media, satellite TVs, newspaper, magazines and websites are state-owned or supported, with the likes of Al-Sharq Al-Awsat, Al-Hayat, Al-Arabiya, Al-Hadath, Al-Jazeera reflecting the interest of the Gulf states, whilst Al-Mayadeen, Al-Alam, Al-Manar are run by Iran and their allies. But despite this ongoing media bias and other channels set up specifically to incite sectarian violence, some countries within the region have proved that progress towards freedom and democracy is possible. This has largely been in states with no fundamental underlying sectarian issues. I have mentioned Tunisia, whose popular uprising inspired revolt across the region back in 2010. The new Tunisian constitution embraces pluralism, good governance, independence of the judiciary, gender equality and even climate change. As President Hollande put it at the time, this confirms in certain circumstances Islam is compatible with democracy. On Africa's northwest coast, Mauritania has witnessed an explosion of new television and radio channels following new press freedoms, and although an Islamist influence remains, the population has the opportunity to enjoy alternative views and subjects. And just recently, President Ould Abdelaziz has announced that he will be stepping down as president at the end of his second term, sticking to his pledge to abide by the Constitution, and told his people, "My last testament to you is education. A good educational system is the fundamental solution and a key to all problems." Kuwait is on the right track to greater freedoms and gender equality, and so, given the right circumstances, Islamism can be combated. But in each of these cases, it has been challenged through freedom and democracy rather than guns and missiles. However, in other areas, particularly in my country, Syria, more sinister forces have been at work. But unfortunately, some regional countries have an inherent fear of a domino effect of democracy across the region, akin to that in Eastern Europe 25 years ago. As a result, they have used their vast wealth and influence to compete to exert control over the region. Qatar promotes the idea of the moderate Muslim Brotherhood in contrast to the Saudi-backed Salafist. The result in both cases has been extreme and violent. A few years ago in Qatar, Mohammed ibn al-Dib al-Ajami praised the Arab Spring revolts and mocked sheikhs playing on their PlayStations. His punishment, life in prison, reduced to 15 years on appeal. That may not surprise you, but where many Westerners are taken aback is in the ever-increasing fundamentalism in Turkey. Turkey is used by many as an example of a progressive Middle Eastern democracy. And yet, the Islamist-rooted AKP has held power since 2002 and is on the course to become a dictatorship who has jailed more journalists than any other country on earth. As a result of this perfect storm of extremism, so many impoverished young people have been drawn to militancy, and the fallout across the region has been disastrous. A few years ago in Iran, the Green Revolution was put down mercilessly. And in Libya, the government struggles to combat Islamist militias who were armed by the West to bring down the Gaddafi regime. I could go on and on, but the message is clear. In an environment where poverty and disillusionment are rife, the young, uneducated people of the Arab world have little alternative to this destructive cycle of hatred and violence. Yes, tribal history makes it difficult to move forward, but Tunisia has a history of tribal roots and sects, and does Northern Europe. Age-old division is a hindrance to progress, but not an insurmountable one. Diversity is a strength that can be witnessed every time one walks through this great building. But, and I say this as a Syrian, as an Arab and as a Muslim, we cannot leave it to the Muslim majority countries to sort out their problems alone. I feel, and this is the reason we are here, that it's our responsibility and in our interest to help. And I believe that we can start that process now through four simple steps. The first simply concerns our mindset. We must cease to view Islamism as a danger in a faraway land. This is a technological age. International borders are increasingly meaningless and are incapable of stopping the flow of perverted ideas. There are young jihadists in London being cultivated and trained in their bedrooms via the internet. Islamism is an enemy with no ambassador to threaten, no border to invade, and no uniformed army to destroy. We must realize that it's a highly contagious plague. It feeds on poverty and disaffection, wherever that may be, from northern Nigeria to here in Brussels. The second step concerns our reaction to that threat. The military route alone does not work. If the various interventions in Afghanistan over the years have proved anything, it is that extremism is a worm that, when severed, will not just survive but will multiply. Force is sometimes necessary, but we must then work towards the active encouragement of democracy and freedom in all places, and that means all places. We cannot choose to overlook state-sponsored extremism and persecution simply because it is in our financial interest. It is not good enough to condone the regime in North Korea but ignore human rights violation in Muslim-majority countries, or for the French president to laud the new Tunisian constitution whilst trading quietly with some authoritarian regimes. Our values are universal and we must encourage them everywhere. The third step is to inspire our young people. They must have the freedom to express themselves, the freedom to live independently, the freedom to trade, and the freedom to explore any alternative to the pool of extremism. In a world of poverty and disaffection, a void appears into which young people have little option but to fall into the hands of Islamist groups promising eternal rewards. Our job is to fill that void. The fourth and final step requires more than words or good intentions. It requires money. because we must use our insight and our expertise based on our own struggle for democracy and freedom to invest in the means for self-sufficient infrastructure across the region. We can invest in the grassroots of society, training individuals, not just in specific trades, but in the ways to build a peaceful, democratic and civil society. We can create schools, universities, hospitals, factories, and infrastructure to support them across the whole Muslim-majority countries. This will provide the genesis of hope and freedom. The education of her people explains why Tunisia has come through the short-term crisis of the Arab Spring. With education comes opportunity. With opportunity comes hope. With hope comes further reward. And collectively, this will breed cynicism in the face of extremism because there will be a better way. Economic growth enabled Argentina and Chile in South America, and Indonesia and the Philippines in Southeast Asia to cast off the shackles of dictatorship. Even here in Europe in the 1970s, the West helped provide an economic and social context enabling democratic transition in Greece, Portugal and Spain. This won't be cheap, but neither is the military option. Very rough estimates put the United States military spend in Afghanistan at $2 trillion US. That would buy a lot of infrastructure. And it would also be a more sensible financial investment because trade and tourism will also flourish in a free and peaceful society. Sadly, this approach is still relatively untried, which is amazing because for too long the reaction to terrorism and to totalitarianism has been to fight rather than look at its causes. My option takes longer, but it stands much more chances of succeeding. It won't happen fast. In the West, real democracy didn't happen overnight. In England, we celebrate Simon de Montfort as the father of modern parliamentary democracy. He died in 1265, and yet suffrage has been universal in the UK for less than 100 years. The issues of the Muslim-majority countries cannot be untangled in an instant. There are no magic tricks. Ultimately, there is only one solution, which is helping others benefit from the freedom and responsibilities we take for granted. And as Prince Charles said a few years ago at Christmas, an emphasis on love of neighbor and doing to others as we would have them to do us are the ultimate foundations of truth, justice, compassion and human rights. Those are our values and we owe it to the people of those countries to allow them to benefit from them as we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ribal. Our last speaker is Adnan Kifayet. He is the Head of Global Security Ventures for the Gen Next Foundation. Before that, he's held a number of senior positions in public service which are pertinent to the conference today. He included at the White House, the US State Department, the US Treasury Department, as well as overseas and diplomatic missions in Jerusalem and Tunis. He also served as US Secretary of State John Kerry's acting special representative to the Muslim communities, which involved many of the issues that we discussed throughout today. But thank you very much for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Sayed. And I will be very quick. I am the last speaker, so everything's been said already. But I have three overall observations that I want to share with you and one suggestion for a way forward. The observations, one is I commend ECR for putting this together, for putting this dialogue together, but I also think about the people who are not in this room. Not just demographically, young people, the women who are not in this room, but also other doctors, scientists, educators, people who may not be academics or religious scholars, or may be those things in addition to, but have other vocations who we can enlist in this effort to promote democracy in the Muslim world. So I think that there's a need to incorporate them. There's a need to reach out to them, even the ones that we disagree with, even the ones that might be on the fringe, however you define the fringe. I think it's important to engage with them, and it's important to get outside of this room, outside of parliaments, outside of these forums, and talk to them. Online and offline, by the way. Two is we should always strive for clarity and honesty. One of the things that I noticed this whole day was people throwing around things like Muslim values, universal values. At one point, I think someone actually asked the question, what's the difference between a Christian value and a Muslim value? I think that is spot on, because I think we have to really reflect what we mean when we say values. We kind of throw these words out there, but if you're talking about human rights, if you're talking about equality, are these a religiously bound value, or are they indeed universal values, regardless of whether you are religious or not, or whether you are one religion or another religion? And I think that we have to really speak up both for the values that we stand for, but also speak out against the values that we do not stand for. And I did not hear a lot about that today, about standing up against the values that may not sit well with us. And there are a number of examples. I won't get into it, but I think that it's worth reflecting on. Finally, my third observation is partners and alliances. The private sector is somewhat missing in our conversation. We love policy people. We love government people. I'm a former government person. But we should make an effort to bring in more business leaders, more philanthropies into this conversation, because at the end of the day, you've got to get people who actually get stuff done and don't just have conversations. And again, I love that we're having this conversation, but we need to move it past the conversation stage and get to actually organizing and funding platforms and doing projects and doing joint ventures. I think you talked about joint ventures at one point. And so that brings me to my final sort of observation or point, which is how do we carry this work forward? How do we carry this dialogue in a productive way forward? And whether it's a once a year conversation or once a quarter conversation, or whatever the tempo may be, I see in this room, the International Republican Institute is represented here. I'm with the Gen Next Foundation, German Marshall Fund, Mr. Thomas, you have the National Film and Video Censors Board. I feel like we can work together and find a home, even a coalition that could find a home for this conversation to carry this forward, and at least have a brainstorming session as a follow-up. By the way, I think it would be great if it was housed the Film and Television Board. I think it would be a lot of fun, in addition to being a serious topic. But it could be a couple of organizations that are in this room, or two or three. And then if we reach out to a philanthropy, or if we reach out to a couple of businesses, or if we can make some inroads with the Parliament here or the Commission, maybe we can find funding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I'd love to have that conversation. And anyone who would like to keep in touch after this event closes, I would love to be a part of that. So thank you again. I tried to be as brief as I could, but.